Good morning, everyone. I'm Caitlin Kenny. I am from the Western New York Library Resources Council. My pronouns are she and her and hers. Thank you for joining us for the ESLN Services webinar series. In today's session, we will be sharing about Ask the Lawyer. Before we get started, I'd like to take care of some housekeeping. We will be utilizing the chat as well as the Q&A feature for this webinar. We'd appreciate it if you could change your settings so that your messages are going to everyone rather than hosts and panelists. You can change this by opening your chat box and clicking on the drop-down menu above the text box. Feel free to introduce yourselves there now. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions so they don't get lost in the chat. You can find that towards the bottom center of your screen. And our presenter will be taking questions after their presentation. Live captioning is available for this webinar. To toggle the subtitles on or off, click the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and choose either show subtitle or hide subtitle. This webinar will be recorded and a link to the recording will be shared in the next few days. This email containing the link will also provide information about getting a certificate of attendance. The forms to both request a certificate of attendance and evaluate this webinar will also be posted in the chat towards the end of this session. If you are unfamiliar with ESLN, this refers to the Empire State Library Network, an organization comprising the 9 Reference and Research Library Resources Council. It's a multi-type library system in New York State. ESLN's unique structure provides support for libraries and archives of all types and sizes into a statewide platform for shared services and collaboration. To spread the word about the work we're doing on behalf of New York libraries, we have scheduled webinars with staff and service providers on the last Friday of each month at 10 a.m. This is the 5th of a 9-part webinar series exploring the various services ESLN has to offer. We'll be covering such topics as New York Heritage, Ask the Lawyer, Empire Library Delivery, and more. You must register for each webinar separately, and they are free and open to all. If you're interested in more sessions in the ESLN Services webinar series, you can visit the ESLN website, and we will put a link to that in the chat. And now I would like to introduce Attorney Stephanie Nicole Adams, who is the primary respondent for the Ask the Lawyer service. And we will get started.
All right. Hello, Caitlin. Let me just get our slides up here. There we go. All right. Now we're all smaller, but we have big things to say. So good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. It's a wet Friday here in Buffalo where I'm coming at you, but looking forward to a nice long weekend. It's a pleasure to be here speaking about this service. And I'm especially excited about it because I get to spend 45 minutes talking with Caitlin, who is a big presence in my life because she is a big part of how the Ask the Lawyer service actually gets out to anybody who's out there reading it. And as Caitlin was describing the Empire State Library Network, I just want to say, you know, this service is so in the spirit of collaboration that clearly underlies the Empire State Library Network. And it's a really important thing. We're going to take you through some slides and talk a little bit about the origins of Ask the Lawyer and what the service can offer to the different members of the 9 regional library councils that comprise the ESLN. And to me, it's just a wonderful example of what happens when organizations that are committed to the sharing of information and sharing of resources and innovation, right? It's what can happen. And it's been something that's really, it's wonderful for me. I mean, you don't have to care about my well-being, but I get to learn from everybody, all the questions that are coming in. And I guess, you know, Caitlin, before we get to our next slides, are you ever surprised by the diversity of questions that we get to the service?
Absolutely. There are some questions that made me stop and think. I'm like, oh, I never even thought of this before. And I get really fascinated reading some of these questions and the answers because it's easy to think, for example, copyright. one size fits all, but that's not the case. There's so many nuances and situations where you really have a different answer for every single thing that could possibly come up, and then some.
Yeah. And one of the things that is impressive is that when the questions are coming in, and I'm hoping that some of the attendees maybe aren't even familiar with the service, so they're actually hearing something new, but I definitely recognize some names on the registrant list. And I know, and so I'll mention and say how much it's appreciated, the quality of the questions that come in, because the questions, the questions are coming in from people who've already done their research, right? And so this is not a Dear Abby level of question asking, right? This is really people saying, well, I know this, and I look at this, and I read these 3 articles, and many times those resources are sent in as part of the question. And so I want to encourage people to keep doing that, because anything that helps us get further down the road. Part of Ask the Lawyer, and when we get into the origins, I'll talk a little bit more about this. It really is designed to save resources. It was designed to say, okay, if one library in Western New York has this question, maybe another library in Central New York or down in Metro Territory, right? Maybe those other libraries also have this question, and why should those libraries pay to reinvent the wheel when we can get an answer? And as long as we're stripping anything that's confidential to the original question out. In other words, of course, I have a duty as an attorney. If a question comes into me, I have a duty to keep things confidential to a certain extent. But with informed consent, we can share. And that's the engine behind Ask the Lawyer. So I think maybe it's time to go to our first real slide. We'll get started. So I guess, Caitlin, you talked about the ESLN, but can you talk a little bit more about how the questions come in from just all around the state?
Yes. So I believe every council is now participating in Ask the Lawyer. It wasn't always this way. Originally, it started with WikiLurk, and then I believe our LC Rochester and Northern New York joined the very next year. And each council has their own Ask the Lawyer form that is available on their website. So if you are a member, if you're in a library from a certain council, you need to go to your council website to access the Ask the Lawyer form. That way we know what region the question is coming from. It makes it easier for all of us on the back end who are organizing these questions. And I believe that's pretty much it. The way WikiLurk has their own form, but if somebody happens to use our form and they're not from Western New York, we will email them back. And I don't know if Cheryl actually directs them to the correct form or if we just sort it out on our end.
Right. So I have a map in my office now that we check to make sure that, if it's coming in, it's coming in from a member that's submitted with their council. And and one of the reasons this is critical is because the model is set up that, so sometimes when people ask for legal services, either people or a company like a library, right? They ask alone, right? They come in and they want legal services just for themselves, or maybe it's 2 people, right? So as long as people, and by people, again, I mean even entities like a library, a historical society, a museum, right? Or a library council, a library system, and a public library. So let's say there's 3, right? If they all are on the same side and want the same answer to something, they can jointly submit a question without worrying about losing attorney-client privilege. And this is something when Cheryl Nab, the executive director of WikiLurk, when we were first brainstorming on this, that was the tough part, right? How could you have a collaborative model, but also make sure that the attorney was paying attention to the ethics of submitting legal questions, right? So one of the things, we have a slide coming up in a little bit about the types of things that Ask the Lawyer doesn't handle. And it's because, we're trying to make sure things that are getting to be really contentious disputes, current lawsuits, right? That's not what the service is for. But it's to proactively ask, and sometimes reactively, but it's to ask questions to help the members get out ahead of things. But one of the takeaways is that it's the member and the council coming in to ask the question together. That's part of how that works. And I did mention a little bit of the history. This is such a great slide. I love it. So yeah, so Cheryl Knapp, executive director at Winnie Lurk, and I got together on a rainy day at a Tim Hortons on Grand Island, New York, to brainstorm this. And then, as you can see, it grew. And Caitlin, so I've seen it grow in the sense of, we've gotten more questions, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we got a lot of questions during the pandemic. That was a very busy time, but the height of the pandemic, right? But I guess, can you share your perspective on, because you've seen the engine that hosts the questions, you've seen that grow and change.
Yes, so I see a lot of the analytics. I deal with the website. I'm the one that actually puts the RAQs onto the website, and I send out the newsletter that comes every couple of months with the most recently asked question. So I see a lot of the traffic, and the traffic has increased exponentially throughout the last few years, especially during 2020. And I think I have a slide later that will talk more about statistics. But when I started Winnie Lurk, it was 2018, so the service was very new to me. I ended up taking over the posting of RAQs, figuring that out, meeting Stephanie. And since then, the attention given to the service has just grown tremendously. It's been really cool to see how much traffic has increased, to see people talking about it. I've gotten email from people asking, is there a way that they could have the question just be delivered to their inbox automatically? It's very popular, and the growth of that has been incredible to watch in the last 4 years.
And I think a lot of that has to do with getting that kind of input, right? And so one of the things for anybody who's attending, and you probably know this yourselves as educators and leaders in your communities, folks who are attending, getting that feedback is so critical. And frankly, well, I'll every day, all day, if anybody wants to say thank you for an answer, and especially if it was helpful, we want to hear that. But actually, criticism or suggestion, right? Constructive criticism and suggestions of how could this be better? Because number one, we always want to make sure we're not reinventing the wheel. We're going to talk about that a little bit. If there's already a resource out there, if it's covered by a handbook, if it's covered by library development, we want to make sure we're not reinventing the wheel. And finding that balance of how do we put this out there, but not flood it, right? And frankly, technology and the capabilities are always changing, right? And so if there's something new that can be an enhancement, it's not necessarily something that we can be responsive to immediately, but that's something for planning, right? So here, I'll move. So we've pretty much covered this. We've talked about what it is. And for anyone who is new, I think you probably gleaned it from context, but it really is this mechanism of if there is a question, either about, let's say there's a contract for ILS management, right? And maybe a librarian. This is an issue I've been passionate about, and so I'll use it as an instructive example, and I'm getting more passionate about it. So let's say a library or a library system, maybe an academic library, is looking at an ILS contract, right? So something for the interconnected library services, interlibrary loan, et cetera. And they're worried about, does the contract adequately protect the privacy of the patrons, but also enable the library and anybody else in the library system, or perhaps in a consortia that the library is in, particularly if it's an academic library? Does the contract enable them to do what they would like to do with their data, maybe to innovate, and certainly to bring in another vendor, maybe to help on additional capability with the data, right? And so this is the kind of thing that if someone has a concern about that, they can send the contract in and just say, we have a general concern about this contract, right? So that's just an example of how the question would get jointly submitted. And as long as the council says, wow, that's an important question, and yes, we'd like to get in on having an answer to that, that's what starts the engine. And then at that point, there is an option in the form And definitely for those of you who have used the form and submitted questions, feedback on the form and how it works. You know, do you feel like you're getting enough information from the form when you're submitting it? We'd love to hear that. But one of the options is to say, look, you know, we feel this question lends itself to a broader shared answer, right? So please, you know, we're going to waive any confidentiality that we have, and we're going to ask you to compose a general answer that's not attorney-client privileged. And then Caitlin's going to help me post it. In fact, I'm going to have nothing to do with it. I'm going to write it and stop thinking about it. And Caitlin's going to post it and make sure people learn about it. Sometimes I will say we do get questions that the confidentiality has been waived, but because I'm maybe perceiving some things within the question, it's going to be my advice that actually no, we not publicize this question, right? Maybe we could rephrase it or put something cautionary out about the issue in general. But sometimes if anybody's out there who submitted a question and suddenly you're either getting an email from Jill in my office or sometimes even a call like from me where I'm just going, oh dear, right? That's going to be an immediate, like, you know what, here's what we need to do. Very often it's because, not very often, this doesn't happen too often, but I will say, if that does happen, it's because maybe I'm seeing a risk that's in there that maybe wasn't being focused on. And I want to make sure that the director who submitted it or the trustee who submitted it is, you know, looking at that big picture, right? So, and that's where we get to the third bullet here. So if it's suited to the service and the consent has been to the published answer, you know, we share that guidance. And one of the things that we've been trying to innovate on, and Caitlin, while you talk about this, I'm just going to check the chat and see if there's any questions that have bubbled into the chat. Can you talk about the tags that we use and that process and the titles, because you come up with the titles?
Yes. So the tags are relatively new. I think we added them a couple years ago. It was before COVID, but I think I don't remember when we started doing them, but we realized that they would be helpful as we started getting more and more questions. We have over 200 questions in the database, so it can be pretty hard to sift through and find the information that's relevant to what you're looking for, or referring back to something on a topic that you wanted to know more about. So we started getting more specific with the tags. I started analyzing the questions, reading the question, reading Stephanie's answer, trying to pull out common themes that seem to come up. I started noticing not really patterns, but just certain laws that were frequently invoked or certain general topics. I try and keep them super general. I tried for a time making them really specific, but that became unwieldy pretty quickly. So when questions were coming in about Netflix and streaming content, I used to tag the platforms individually, and now it's just all under streaming. So it's been interesting thinking about what would be the easiest way for people to find the information that they're looking for, the specific questions that they're looking for. And we do go back and reevaluate the tags all the time, thinking about, you know, does this phrase really work well as a tag, or is it not really intuitive? We recently did an audit where we went through every question in the database, and the tags were something that we talked frequently about, trying to come up with some better words or phrases that people would be thinking about more. And then we realized that we needed to have a column on the side so that people could just click on a word and be taken to all the questions on that phrase. So we had our website developer build that, and then it listed every single tag that we were using. And as that list started growing, it became unwieldy. So we just started using the top 10 tags. I will say that COVID-19 was, I think, the #1. And then copyright is #2. So the our most popular topics. But we're seeing some other ones starting to jump up there. You asked me to talk about something else.
Oh, no, I think you got it in there. You got it. So it was really one of the things that's handy for me, because of course, at this point, as much as I try to not let, be practicing law for over 20 years now, which just blows my mind, like warp my mind, if I were doing the tags, you would all get tags like, civil rights and criminal procedure and, all this. And so Caitlin helps me put them into like, human phrases so that hopefully they are intuitive for everybody. And that's why, we look here, what have we found are the strengths of the service? It's a collaborative project. And the more we get input from people asking informed and challenging questions, I think the better it is. And I don't take credit for that, because my contribution is going to be what it is no matter what. But when we get well-researched and thoughtful questions, and again, sometimes when the answers pop in my inbox, there I am having my normal day, suing people, doing whatever. And then suddenly this question pops up. And sometimes my staff will see, I'll just be sitting there and just go, right? Because my mind has been blown by a question. And we did get one, we got a few questions in advance, and someone reminded me of theirs in chat. So we'll weave a little bit of that into this. And so we got a question that was, my teachers have made their own audiobooks by recording themselves reading a novel. Is that copyright infringement or illegal? So this is one of those ones where, feel free to stand up and take a small back stretch or whatnot if you've read and Ask the Lawyer that says, this is complicated, right? So a lot of these questions, this seems like a very simple question. It's 2 sentences long, but it's complicated, especially from it sounds like, this is going to be in a school setting, because definitely if audiobooks are being created to be adaptive copies for any type of ADA accommodation, right? So if someone has a reading disability, then that actually, there's some precise circumstances, and we do have an Ask the Lawyer on that. Maybe, I know Clara in my office is listening. If she wants to pop in the link to that in the chat, that would be great. Sometimes it can be legal, right? Creating a recording of an audiobook just because it's a cool thing to do, because you can, I don't know, I'm not coming down on teachers. Their job gets harder every day. We'll leave that there. But, let's say the recording was just to be able to read the recording to the students while the teacher was also trying to do some grading or something like that, right? And so it was just kind of, even if it was part of the curriculum, it was just entertainment. When a person creates a copyright protected work, and everybody on this session owns copyrights. You might not have registered them, but you all own copyrights, because I'm sure everybody here has either written a LibGuide, written an essay, maybe written a poem, anything like that. Authors own their work. As long as it's sufficiently original, authors own their work, and they own it for the duration of their life plus 90 years now. And I don't know, we might even get another extension, although Disney's not getting the favors it used to get. We'll leave that one over there now too. Whew, so many politics on a Friday. Anyway, people own their work, right? Unless they've sold it. And then of course there's another exception, which is when I worked at a university as an in-house counsel, if I wrote a great legal memo, let's say it was a wonderful legal memo, but I wrote it because I had to do that as part of my job. So the legal memo was getting circulated to the board of trustees. That legal memo, that copyright belonged to my employer because I did it as part of my work, right? So it very quickly gets complicated, but definitely, I could see there could be a legal reason to record an audiobook and have it not violate copyright whatsoever. And that's where taking a look at a school district's ADA policy, its policy on adaptive copies, right, for accessibility is so important, and taking a look at just in general the policies about copyright, and of course the other big one that I haven't mentioned yet, which would be a fair use exception. So let's say a teacher wanted to record 3 audiobooks, just enough of the audiobooks to do a compare and contrast about maybe the rhythm or the intonation of what you would want someone to pay attention to when they're reading it out loud. In other words, there was a purpose beyond just creating an audio version and it was related to a lesson and part of the curriculum. That's another one where it could be allowed. And then another example is for the Teach Act. So you could have someone who's actually, creating a recording because they're teaching remotely. That's another exception. So if anyone needs more information, like if I just said something and you're just like, oh, that was interesting, wait, keep talking, I have questions. We'll put the links, because there's a lot on that, as Caitlin just mentioned. That's a big topic on the site, and we have those that'll be on that in that top 10 with copyright. Absolutely. And Teach Act is another one of our tags. Caitlin, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's see here. So yes, here's our stats. This is wild. 403 questions since 2016, 249 RAQs. My life can be measured in RAQs now. And the huge increase during COVID. Caitlin, can you talk a little bit about what we did when we did the audit? We did an audit to make sure we were pruning anything that was out of date. So if the law had completely changed, obviously I didn't want that out there for anybody to rely on. So, or if things had somewhat changed, we added some footnotes. But maybe you can talk, Caitlin, about the decision. We talked about what were we going to do with all of the RAQs that were based on the executive orders that are no longer in place. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, one thing that makes it difficult is how much things kept changing during COVID. The executive orders coming out all the time, recommendations were changing all the time. It was very hard to keep up. And unfortunately, that means some things went out of date very quickly. But it didn't mean that the answer was necessarily invalid. It's just some of the laws and recommendations at the time no longer apply. So we decided to change some of the titles. We kept the original title, but we added a parenthesis above it that says 2020 pandemic date specific, so that the reader is aware that this came out during a specific time in the pandemic when these specific recommendations came out. And to have that in the back of their mind if they're planning to use the information from this question for a certain thing that they're doing or something that they're putting together. And it doesn't mean that the information is bad. It just means that you need to consider that things were in constant flux, and you need to consider that it might not be totally relevant, or the recommendation, you might get questions on the recommendations you're taking from it. So we're just trying to make it very apparent that some of the content may have recommendations that may no longer be applicable.
Right. Right. And every one of them had, they're all heavily footnoted. Even at the time, I was very aware of, wow, we're flying by the seat of our pants as a state here, right? Like, so, I think I even put a lot of parentheticals, right? This is current as of July 7th, 2020, and things like that. We did just get a really interesting comment in chat from Marta Brunner. Is there a way you can add a suggest a tag so that people can indicate what search term they'd like to search by? Can we put that in the idea hopper?
I like that. I like that idea a lot. The way our website is right now, I don't think we can do it, but it's something we can definitely think about for the future. So I'm making a note of that. But in the meantime, you can just email me and suggest a tag. I can put my email in the chat. I welcome suggestions. I love suggesting for this sort of thing because it is a public service in a way, for the ESLN libraries. And we're always trying to address our members' needs and make things better for our members. And we can't do that without our member input. For a member-driven organization, we need that input from you. So you can always email me with your suggestions.
Yep. And that's one where, the form that we use right now, if we do update the form every now and again, especially if we've taken a look and said, maybe we need to have, give people the power to pick a more urgent, like a tighter deadline, but also if it's a question where they're like, oh, we can wait, 2 or 3 months, right? You know, I don't want to back burner things forever, but it, you know, giving us flexibility. So yeah, that's definitely, we'll keep that in mind. That's really cool. All right, let's see here. So, and then we do have, right, Winnie Lurk members use the service most. I think they got the most comfortable. And I, you know, I'm here in Western New York, you know, so it's, I do think the more people, it's a very high trust exercise, right? To ask a legal question. We get questions about some really, really intense topics. And I'm always mindful of the fact that if that question, you know, we get a lot of academic questions too, that are kind of like, oh, it would be cool to know this, but we get questions where, I don't know about you, Caitlin, but I can sometimes feel the tension or the frustration that has boiled up before the person sat down at the keyboard and trusted the service, you know, to send us the question. Do you get that sense sometimes?
Definitely. Yeah, it's, and the question, and to be clear, the questions aren't phrased in a frustrated way, but you can tell a lot of thought went into them.
Oh,
Some
yeah.
are worded very carefully.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
that's where some of that is coming from.
Yeah, and so, and I think to trust, you know, I do think it's easier if someone has, you know, knows some of the people behind. That's one of the things I was, you know, thinking about for today, right? That people can put a face on. Well, I'm not just putting my question into some kind of memory hole, right? There's real people who are waiting to hear it, and who are, you know, and we try to get a proposal when a question comes in. I try to get a proposed answer, or for that matter, if the question isn't suited to the service, we try to deal with that within like 1 business day, right? And then sometimes the answers, depending, if people are out sick from my office and things, we can have some deadline issues. But other than that, you know, we try to keep it moving. So here's the top 10 questions we had since the launch, and as Caitlin said, lots of pandemic. I was really interested to see, however, I'm not surprised, but really interested, but that the yearbook issue, which continues to be an issue, and just, you know, the other parts of my practice, I do litigation involving land use and planning. I work with a lot of licensed professionals on contract issues and things like that, education law stuff, of course. And one thing I work on is like image use and as part of, you know, copyright and trademark and advertising concerns, and image use is a big concern, and that is what is at the heart of these requests to remove scanned yearbook pages, right? And people could have all sorts of compelling reasons why they don't want to be in an old yearbook, right? They may have had a change in their identity that they, you know, treasure and don't want to have a publicly searchable resource with that former identity. They might have a stalker, right? There's reasons why someone might not want to be in a scanned yearbook. And so that one was, you know, we took a lot of thought with that answer here to really think of just the, you know, what would be the permutations. But at the same time, there's value in archiving that information and in preserving it, right? So there's a compelling reason to save it as well. And it's fine. It's trying to find that balance is what that answer, you know, and that body of, because there's a couple of yearbook Ask the Lawyer RAQs, which, yes, someone comments that Racket Lake, one of my favorite places to visit when I was a kid, Racket Lake uses RAQ as their acronym or their abbreviation. So I don't know, trademark battle in the future. No, I'm just kidding. So here's our info on the service. So if anyone's out there just needing more, this is a pamphlet that ESLN and Winnie Lurk put together to just give the information out. I think this is handy, especially for board members, especially if you have a board member who's saying you're going to do what, and as an attorney, they might have some questions. You know, I think I talked about the importance of considering the ethics, the attorney-client privilege, the confidentiality that's owed, right? And to me, I take great pride in knowing that if an attorney asks a lot of tough questions about the service, we have been thoughtful and we are ready to provide those answers. So let's see here. This is what the request form looks like right now. We've got 10 minutes left and we did get 2 other questions in advance. So while we're looking at this, I'm going to try to put the questions into context. So let's see here. One question we got is, and this is another one that I'm starting to get a little passionate about, and I think we do have an uptick in this type of question. What's the best advice you can give for municipal libraries who have undefined relationships with their municipality? Right? Whew, okay. If anyone wants to chime in with their version of their best advice based on experience, throw that into the chat, because I would love to read it. Because typically, once I'm seeing these situations, they're not usually calling my office because everything's going so well, right? No one calls a law office to say we need a lawyer, things are great. So and that said, I have seen some really good productive relationships. So this question: best advice for municipal libraries with an undefined relationship with their municipality. So it is time, if the relationship is positive but undefined, right? So let's say everything's great, but you have a proactive director, a proactive board of trustees who's looking around going, who does supply the insurance? What does happen if there's a fire? Who does control the building access? Whose HR manual applies? Is there a lease, right? All these little things that happen, especially if you have a municipality and a library with a very tight relationship, where the municipality is doing the payroll, owns the building, maybe provides the security system if there is one, right? All of these things. I wouldn't say it's the best advice, because of course I can't give you advice, but I'll say for guidance right now, because advice is confidential. But the guidance I would say is it's really it's time to start answering those questions one by one, but to have a plan, for a strategic plan of what answers do you want to have, and also how at the same time having a plan to make sure that you're keeping those good tight relationships positive. And that's maybe 30% law, but the rest of it 70% diplomacy, right? Really good relationships, because it's all about the relationships. And so for instance, a healthy municipal / library relationship will say, wow, let's say it's one of the situations where we have a library that's in the same building, that's the town hall and the historical society, right? Everybody's bundled in there together. And all of the leadership of the different organizations in the building should want really clear answers. If there's a security issue, if there's a fire, right? What insurance applies, whose emergency response plan applies, how is this going to roll out? And that, unfortunately, a lot of times questions like that can be perceived as power play questions, because it's politics, right? It's local politics, local government at its finest, and sometimes it will be taken as a threat. So having a tactic to ask that, I have a checklist and a training I do for trustees that's like, top 10 things trustees should be asking. Trustees are not entrusted with the day-to-day micromanagement of the library, right? They're there to ask and to make sure that the big things that they are fiduciarily responsible for are taken care of. One is to make sure there's adequate insurance, and that should be evaluated on an annual basis. So that's a good one to start out with, right? If we had a fire, who's covered for what, right? And are the assets of the library covered? And that can kick it off. But I really would say there's an RAQ, and maybe Clara can put this in. It's a model. It's just a template. You have to work on it with your local counsel, your attorney, and your library system, also a great resource, right, for this kind of thing, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel. And they've considered these types of questions for their other members. That brings up, topics like that. Clearly, I could talk about this issue forever. I'm just going to double check the chat and see. Committee on Open Government. Yeah, have you been to Nancy Grosselfinger said Committee on Open Government has mastered the index of issues and responses. Nancy, in the time we have left, let me know, have you visited their page since they changed their website? I would be interested in your opinion, as if it's as good as it was before. You can probably guess my thoughts. All right. Let's see here. Caitlin, you know what? I'm just wondering in the, in the form here. So this is the second part of the form that people see. Would we ever, if the form were to be revised, which I appreciate, we have to schedule that and everything. Is this the kind of place where it could say, do you have any tags you suggest for your question?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to put it. Yeah, I think we could put it in there. It's really easy to change the form too.
Yeah.
As opposed to our page.
Right. So it's okay. All right. So just a little quick revision. And this is right. This is the beauty of the collaboration. Oh, I've got chills. Right. So, we could put something right here, in a fillable, right? Do you have any suggested tags? And if we don't use your suggested tag because it just doesn't work, we'll let you know why. But yeah. Oh, that's cool. All right. So I'm not promising it to happen right away. Caitlin's booked up, but we can get it. Maybe we can get it done. All right. And let's see here. So here's our other topics. I'm going to look at the chat. And Nancy wrote me back. I visited and no, I do not find it as helpful. Yeah, Nancy, we can get together sometime and grouse about that because the old one didn't look good at all, but it was so functional. Yes, we can write a letter. Okay. Let's see. We got just a few minutes. We had one other question sent in advance. So how can association libraries be held accountable to the taxpayers from whom they receive almost automatic funding? So this is an interesting question. Accountability for chartered libraries comes in many, many forms. And to me, the biggest one really is they're subject to, they have to create these or submit reports, right? And they still have to, if they are a 501c3, they still have to do their required filings. And so there's other mandatory reporting avenues other than just a vote. And of course, the taxes are still, they can be voted on, and then the accountability could come from politics. There is a degree of removal. I guess, this is the type of question that I could probably go on for about 4. I don't know, what do you think, Caitlin? 4 pages? 3?
Yeah, sounds about it.
Yeah, I could wax on about this one for a while, but it's something I remind when I work with libraries directly or their towns or what have you. Accountability comes in a lot of different ways, right? Especially for libraries. There is no place, and library systems and our research councils, our 3 Rs, there's so much accountability because of the constant reporting and assessment. And I think, with that, let me just see here. Oh yes, yeah. If you're currently being sued, don't put that in the service. That's not now, if you got served and you don't know what to do, and you just say, help, we got served, I don't know what to do. That is the kind of thing we can help with, right? And I think there actually is some language we have of if you've been served, what to do. So we are careful not to reinvent the wheel. So we're just showing some of the places that I go to get the answers, but we always make sure, and I always ask, if Winnie Lurk knows about anything or anybody out there, right? When we get a question, we want to make sure we're not, I don't know, rewriting something that's already, if there's a great resource that is already being relied upon, right? Caitlin, is there anything that we wanted to add at this point? I know we're in the final seconds here.
I'm sure there is. But I just want to say I appreciate everyone's interest in the service and their use of the service. I think that people ask some really incredible questions. So I hope that you're going through the RQ database and just perusing it. I have learned a lot since working with Stephanie on this service, just about library law, but open meetings and board of trustees stuff and image use. And I've actually referred people to this website too, because I'll get random questions. I'm like, oh yeah, Stephanie actually covered this before,
Yeah.
so I'll go and find the question, email them back a link. So yeah, it's a great service.
Yeah, no, it's, and I, you know, from the beginning all the way to where it is now, I just want to thank everybody, and you know, and just say that I think, you know, libraries have to do a lot of, there's a lot of legal issues that come up. Like as Caitlin was saying, there's just all these questions, and it's hitting you more and more. And I think if we plan properly, one of the themes I try to hit in the answers whenever possible is how you can take something that seems like a burden or a legal risk, and how can you turn that into empowerment for your library or your system? In other words, okay, well, we have to do this. How are we going to do it in a way that puts our mission forward, shows our commitment to intellectual freedom, right? A big theme right now. And again, it's your input and your foresight feeding the service that is what makes it successful. And so I'm just going to check the chat. We got the last link from Clara, and I'm good. This was a great way. This is a great way to start my Friday. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you, Stephanie.